So after Bernie's win in New Hampshire, you had coming out of the woodwork endless, supposedly enlightened takes on the meaning of this victory for Bernie, the meaning of this loss for Biden, the meaning of this surge by Amy Klobuchar. And I don't want to be rude or disrespectful to anybody, but the meaning of this is actually quite limited. And most of these enlightened hot takes are not particularly enlightened. Bernie won a primary by 1.5 percentage points, tied in the number of delegates with Pete Buttigieg, 9 each, and now has 2 popular vote wins in the 2 primaries that we've had so far. The future is wide open, okay? The circumstances of this particular primary, in addition to this just being the first 2, tell us very little about who is ultimately going to be the nominee. So let's go through some of the talking points. There are pro and anti-Bernie talking points in there. There's a whole bunch of different stuff. Let's talk through them. Some of the takes are just straight up dumb. Okay. One was the results from New Hampshire are really bad for Bernie because in 2016, he got 60% of the primary vote. And this time he got 25% of the primary vote. Come on. Okay. There were 2 real candidates in 2016. Yeah. I think, you had, what was the dude's name? Vermin Supreme got 300 votes or something in New Hampshire in 2016. There were really 2 candidates. This time you have 5 people coming away with delegates in New Hampshire. To say Bernie is doing poorly because he got 26% instead of 60 last time is a meaningless take. It tells us nothing whatsoever. Second talking point, Bernie underperformed the polling. Bernie underperformed. His results underperformed polling by about 3 percentage points. Thus, clearly Bernie is on the decline. Bernie underperformed by 2.8. He still won. The delegate count for him and Pete is identical, 9 each from New Hampshire, and almost every delegate is still up for grabs. There's a candidate in Michael Bloomberg who hasn't even been on the ballot yet, who is polling 15% nationally now, which we will talk about a little bit later. The Bernie underperformance of 2 points, 2.8 points, is meaningless in the big picture. Don't fall for that anti-Bernie take. Now, you also have some pro-Bernie talking points that are not particularly meaningful. I heard one floating around yesterday that no candidate has lost when they win Iowa and New Hampshire in recent history. Now, that may or may not be true depending on how far back you go, but it's even a weird technicality because Bernie did not get the most delegates in Iowa. So by the way that it is measured, Bernie didn't win Iowa. Bernie did get the most votes. Either way, it's a fight about something that's not relevant. It just does not actually tell us what's going to happen in this primary. Another talking point floating around is that Bernie or Pete or whoever, that they can't necessarily coalesce the non-white vote, and thus the results in the early white states don't matter. Well, if you look at the polling for Bernie, it's very different than Pete with black voters and Latino voters. That's number one. Just because there haven't been large Latino and black populations that have voted yet doesn't mean that you can make that claim. We do have polling about that. It is true that the results in the early white states reflect the demographics of those states, but they're still important. They dictate the publicity and the headlines around the primary. They can provide a PR lift. And case in point, we've seen that the support for candidates from the Black and Latino communities has shifted as candidates have done better and worse nationally and in the early primaries. So that's not a particularly good talking point either. Here's the reality. And a lot of you are going to be bored by the reality, or you'll find it sort of uninteresting because we want to feel like everything's already happened and really very little has. The numbers so far tell us some things and they don't tell us other things. The numbers so far suggest we will have 4 to 5 candidates staying in this mathematically, at least hypothetically viable for a while. We should expect that. 5 candidates already have delegates. I expect Tom Steyer will get delegates in South Carolina. That will be a 6th candidate with delegates. I expect Michael Bloomberg will get delegates on Super Tuesday. He's polling in the teens in Texas and Florida. We'll talk about that later. That's a bunch of delegates for Bloomberg. So one thing so far is that this will likely be a big field for a while. Number 2, the dynamics of this race could change very quickly depending on what happens with Michael Bloomberg. His polling has exploded, which I want to get to. He had this horrible racist audio released by Benjamin Dixon, our friend, 2 days ago. His campaign is trying to do crisis management around the racist audio. We will see how his polling is affected by that. But right now, every indication that Bloomberg will be a factor. I still believe Bloomberg ends up third or fourth in terms of total delegates by the time this is done. If Biden keeps failing and Bloomberg comes in strong on Super Tuesday, the DNC establishment will have to make a decision which will have a big impact on the rest of the race. And until they do, we won't know what's going to happen. Will the establishment abandon Biden and get behind Pete or Amy? Or will the establishment abandon Biden and get behind Bloomberg if Biden's failures continue? These are real questions. You know, whether a popular vote win in Iowa and New Hampshire guarantees a primary victory is not a particularly relevant or interesting question. This is a very different primary than one's past. Everyone wants to know now what the path is. It's not knowable right now because of the unique nature of this race, including that we have a candidate who's not yet been on any ballot, but is polling as high as 17% in a recent national poll. That's Michael Bloomberg. We'll look at those numbers a little bit later. So far, let me know what you think. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. I do want to hear from you. One of our sponsors today is Vincero Watches, giving you 15% off your entire order when you go to davidpacman.com/watch. Don't pay thousands of dollars for a high quality watch that looks great because you don't have to. All of Vincero's watches are made with high-end materials, masterfully built, and they look like something you'd spend a ton of money on. But every Vincero watch ranges from about $150 to $300. I went over to their website and picked out the Bellwether in silver and white. Really nice, elegant look. It's a chronograph style. Wore it to a gala over the weekend. And a lot of people ask me, where's the watch from? Really, really great look. Totally different. They also sent me the Altitude in matte black and red, a much more rugged view of what a watch can look like. Really like it as well as the athletic strap. It's a new year. It's a new decade. It's time to reestablish your style, add something new to your look, and a high quality watch is the perfect way to do that. You can get 15% off Vincero's entire collection when you go to davidpacman.com/watch.